Well, good day to you. Welcome to Village Church. Really glad that you are all here. My name is Mark. I'm the senior pastor here at Village Church. Good to have you. We are in the midst of a series called Masterclass, where we're delving into kind of all the issues of life, kind of taking a masterclass of life. Masterclasses are this thing that get branded out there. You can take them, you can pay for them, and they're on writing, or they're on parenting, or they're on cooking, or whatever. And they use people who are specialists in a particular area to teach these courses. And we're using a specialist called the Apostle Paul in the book of 1 Corinthians in your Bible. So if you got a Bible, open it up. 1 Corinthians chapter 4 is where we are. And this week's very interesting because this text really messed me up and actually bothered me to the point this week where I sat in my office, and I have this glass wall in my office where I sketch out notes and meetings. And I was so disturbed by this text, so shaken. I was actually crying while I was studying it, which might not kind of come across as you get into it because it's cognitive, it's ideas, but there was something about it that shook me so bad that I sat there for 2 hours, like sketching it out. I actually called 2 other staff members in and said, help me sketch out this text to make it say what I don't think it's saying. And then they came in and we worked on it and tried to make it say what I thought it was saying that was bugging me, to try to make it say something else so that you wouldn't be disturbed by it. And then we realized it just was saying that, and there's no way around it. And the problem with it is that if this text is true, what bugged me about it is I don't know that I actually know a Christian. That's crazy. If this text is true, I just don't know whether any of you are actually Christians. All right, so welcome to Village Church. Glad you're here. Okay, here's the thing. This is what Paul says, and this is why at the end of it in verse 14, so I'm just gonna go to the end of the text before you get mad at me, all right? Don't get mad at me, I'm just a messenger, okay? So Paul even, because what I'm gonna go through is everything from verse 6 down, hopefully to verse 13. We'll see how much time we have. But at the end of it, he says this. So I'm just giving this up to you up front so you don't get mad as we go. He says, I do not write these things to make you ashamed. All right, meaning I'm your pastor and I love you, and everything I just said that's gonna make you feel bad about your life and gonna make you go, my gosh, what am I doing? I didn't do it to shame you, but to admonish you, to inspire you, to hopefully you will do something with your life that's different than when you came in here. Hopefully this is not just another Sunday for you, but there's gonna be something that you actually hear that changes you at a heart level and a soul level and a mind level and an action level that will change your life. That's the hope I'm coming with right off the top. So before we get there though, we need to go back to the other verses. So start in verse 6. Now, let me set the stage this way. Sometimes when we're trying to go through life, we come up with a bad answer to a legit question. All right, that happens to us. So sometimes we come up with a bad solution to a legit question that we need to figure out. So for instance, culturally speaking, there's a lot of discussion about gender. And what we started to do as a culture is dissolve gender so that there is no genders anymore. And we're gonna be talking about this more and more as we get into chapter 5 and 6 of 1 Corinthians, which will be an interesting part of the cultural conversation that our culture is having right now, because Paul deals with it in chapter 5 and 6 when he starts to get into it. So we'll save that for that. But there's an interesting thing where we don't have genders anymore. We're trying to absolve it. We're trying to make everything, so to the point where I read a story this week of a guy in Calgary who recognized that women actually they pay less car insurance, right? Because monthly car insurance bills are usually less for women because insurance is based on statistical data on risk. And if you take higher risks, you pay higher. That's how insurance works. So, men tend to be far worse drivers in regard to aggression. They get most fatalities on the road statistically are men. They drive drunk more. They go after faster cars more. So men tend to pay higher insurance. And so he recognized that, and he said, well, culturally, we don't really kind of question whether someone wants to change their gender anymore. So I'll just change my gender to female, and then I'll pay less car insurance. And they can't question me. And so that's what he did. And so now he's paying less car insurance because the insurance company can't really say, well, you're not a woman, you've decided. So he says, hey, I just came in, I want to change my gender to woman. And they said, why? Because I want to pay less per month. And they said, okay, sir, all right? So that's what's happening. And so what's starting to then take place is insurance companies across the US are getting ahead of this, and they're starting to recognize this. So now what they're doing is they're actually stopping evaluating anything based on gender, and now everything's going to be flattened. And so life insurance, for instance, women tend to pay less in life insurance because they live longer and they live less risky lives. That's just statistical probability. That's the way insurance works. But now what they're saying is, let's stop asking all of those questions. We're not going to make any insurance decisions based on gender anymore. So ladies, what you get is you get to come up and pay the same as men. Congratulations, you've arrived. So the reality is that's where insurance companies are going. They're not going to bother doing any kind of gender data anymore, even though math is math. This way, math doesn't have an agenda. Math is just math. Stats are just stats about the real world. And yet we've started to take math and we've started to invest it with philosophy. And we've started to say, well, now, okay, now. So my point is that's a really silly answer to a really legit question. Now, that happens in life. We answer things wrongly and sillily based on a legit question. Now, sometimes, though, what happens is we will misdiagnose a problem to begin with. That's another problem we face in life. So instead of giving a bad answer to a good question, we sometimes misdiagnose a problem. And so, for instance, my wife, I learned over the years after preaching many, many times and watching her in an audience, I started to realize I don't like to look at my wife while I'm preaching, okay? Because she's a very distracting person to look at as a husband, all right? So I look at her and she'll do this with her face or like disapprovingly look at me, like a wife's look of shame. Like, how could you do that? How could you even say that? Like that look, and I can't deal with that, all right? I don't want to look at my wife shaming me as I'm doing my job, all right? I don't come to her job and do that to her, all right? So we created this rule, and I said, you have to be totally out of my eyesight. If you're in the room, all right, and there's 5,000 people in the room or 300, find a dark corner and get there, because I don't want to look at you, all right, while I'm preaching. Now, that felt unhealthy. That felt like maybe our marriage actually isn't very good. Like maybe ministry isn't for us because these other pastors, I see their wives dote on them. And they're like, oh, they're sitting front row and they're taking notes and they're like, oh, my husband's oh, yes. And so maybe our marriage actually is not very healthy. Maybe we're not legit. Maybe we should be like other pastors, how they function, because they seem to be functional. Like every third day, there's a picture of them and their wife, and the wife's praying for them before they go out and preach. And it's all like, man, we're so in love. And it's like, I look at my wife, I'm like, can you sit in the dark? Like this whole thing just seems to be off. So yesterday, I got the great privilege of going and sitting at the feet of a man named Dr. James Houston. And Dr. Houston is a brilliant man. He's 96 years old. He founded Regent College. He went to Oxford with C.S. Lewis and J.R. Tolkien. And so I got to sit and hear stories about Lewis and Tolkien and have conversation. I would just like touch him because maybe he touched them at some, that's not at all. Anyways, the point is like this guy, so I got to sit with this man of great wisdom. And so I was like, man, like this is legit. And I was sitting there and he made me feel better about myself because he said, we'll have people over, and his wife who passed away 4 years ago, they would sit in the room and someone would say, they'd be talking about like one of his books, and his wife would yell from the kitchen, James, stop talking, no one reads your books, all right? And I was like, oh, good. Someone else has a wife like this too. This is so great. The only person I know who hasn't read my book is my wife. So here's the thing. So then he said, sometimes I'll become a consultant for an unhealthy church. And he goes, I remember one time a church hired me to become a consultant because things were a mess and the pastor and people were wondering about all these things. And so I went in and I said, here's all I need to know. Put me in an audience. Let me watch him preach and just give me a view of his wife. because I'll watch her. And I'm like, oh no. Because now he's gonna evaluate. Does she have a bag over her head like my wife? That's gonna be bad for the church. And he said, and I said, why do you wanna look at the wife? He said, because if she's sitting front row, doting on him, taking notes, leaning into his brilliance, something's wrong in that marriage, and that's a disaster. And I was like, whoa, praise Jesus, all right? Now, here's the point. Sometimes we misdiagnose a problem. I misdiagnosed a problem. I thought that the fact that I make my wife sit in the dark was something bad about our marriage, and Dr. James Houston says that's the healthiest marriage you can get. If your wife doesn't like your sermon, you're in a good place. And all of that came about because I remember there was days, I remember we were at a camp one time and I got up to preach and she was in the audience and I'd been stuck outside talking with someone, pastoring them, and the worship was happening inside and I didn't get a chance to get in and listen to it. And then I walked in and I started preaching, but I didn't hear any of the music, and part of my sermon was critiquing worship music. And so I started listing these songs and these lyrics that were silly and sounded more like Buddhism than Christianity and that were losing, and she's sitting in the front row, she starts to do this. And I'm like, oh no, I must be reading lyrics to songs they just sang before I came in here. This is a disaster. So for 35 minutes, I'm like, I can't even I don't even know what I talked about. I'm like, whatever. And then I get to the end, I'm like, babe, oh my gosh, did I criticize the songs they just sung before I ever came in? She's like, no, your sermon was fine. I'm like, what was all the... She's like, I wasn't doing that. I'm like, okay, back of the room forever. I can't even deal with you. All right, anyways, all this to say, we sometimes look to our life and we say to ourselves, the thing that's lacking, the reason I don't have power, the reason I can't fix my marriage, the reason I can't fix my fight, the reason I can't live in fullness, the reason I'm not happy, all of these things is because here I know what I should do, and we misdiagnose the problem or we come up with a bad answer to the question, which is, and here's what the Corinthians started to do and why Paul writes what we're about to unpack. The solution they came up with was we need to believe that we have everything in the now. We need to name it and claim it. We need to believe that heaven is now. We're not gonna wait, we got power. We should walk in it. We should be legit. We should be victorious. We should be conquerors. Everything's in the now, and so we should go after it. And the Apostle Paul comes at them and he says, you're giving a really bad answer to a legit problem and you're misdiagnosing your actual problem. Then he comes at them and he does what we're about to unpack, which is he lays out for them why they should stop that because it's gonna destroy their life, okay? So here's what he does. Take a running start. All of that was intro. Verse 6, he says, I have applied all these things to myself and Apollos. Starts talking about a local church leader. Apollos and Paul planted this church. We're pastoring this church. We're teaching at this church. And he says, for your benefit, brothers, that you may learn by us not to go beyond what is written, that none of you may be puffed up in favor of one against another. Here's what was happening. They were critiquing Paul and Apollos. They started making fun of them. They started to get puffed up. They started to get arrogant. They started to deal with pride. They started to go, the Apostle Paul, remember when he planted our church? I know he did a bunch of sacrifice. I know he was a good teacher. I know most of us in Corinth came to Christ under his ministry. I know he was a good guy, but I haven't seen him in a while. And you know what? He was kind of short, wasn't he? And he was kind of ugly. And he keeps getting arrested. His blog's kind of boring lately. I didn't really did you like how he dressed? You know what I think? I think we're fine. I think we're fine without him. I know he started this church, but I didn't like his tone. He was a bit of a jerk. He never made any time for me to meet with me. The church started to grow beyond a few, and it was like I couldn't even get a meeting with him. I think we're fine without him. I think we're just good. I think we're living in power. I think we should just teach each other. I think we're fine without Apollos and Paul and leaders. I think we're all good. And Paul starts to come at them and say, be very careful. Now, it's very funny because the world doesn't really change that much. I hear this about me, right? I hear critique about everything from listen, it's very funny. I go for meetings with people and they sit across from me and go, I've been thinking about who you hang out with. Really? You have been? Tell me about it. And I've been thinking about, what you do with your time. And I'm thinking about what your family, I was watching your wife on Instagram and what she was wearing, it just didn't really hit me the right way. Really? Tell me about that. And the fact that you do, and you talk about this, and I don't really, I think you really go after power. I think you really like power. Really? Okay. And I think, actually it was great. We got an email one day about the fact that we were selling my books, The Problem of God, in the foyers of our sites during the Problem of God series. And they said, is he trying to get rich off Village Church? Let's talk. Okay. You figured me out. You guys have exposed me, because here was my plan from the beginning. See, when I was a 19-year-old kid, here's what I did. I was in the film industry, and I said, here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna detach myself from that. I'm gonna defy my entire family, and I'm gonna go to Bible college, okay? And I'm gonna go totally broke in Bible college. I'm gonna work at Michael's Arts and Crafts store for $6.85 an hour to put myself through Bible college. And when the systematic theology teacher assigns me 3 books, I'm gonna read 7. And then I'm gonna write papers, and I'm gonna go after every theological nuance of every biblical text for 7 straight years of my life. I'm gonna study Greek hardcore for 3 years. I'm gonna become a teaching assistant, do lectures, work with students. I'm gonna move from Toronto, everybody I've ever known, every comfort I've ever known, say goodbye to my family, and move across to Vancouver with my wife. And we're gonna be dead broke. I'm gonna spend 20 grand a year on school, even though we only bring in 30. I'm gonna live in a basement apartment. I'm gonna put tons of pressure on my marriage. I'm gonna walk away from my kids every single Saturday at 5 o'clock and say, I love you, goodbye, as you go live your life. And I'm gonna do my best under Jesus to labor every week to become a philosopher and a theologian and a good leader. But then I gotta be a good staff person and a good marriage counselor. I gotta do all of these things for 15 years. Then I'm gonna start a church out of nothing with no guarantees I'm gonna actually have any money to be able to feed my family. I'm gonna start that with 16 people in my room and labor every day, hours and hours and hours, doing my best to plant a church. You know why I'm gonna do all that? So I can make $120 from you in the foyer. That's the plan. You got me. That was it was a long-term plan, I admit. And maybe per hour, not worth the money. Knock it off. What do you do? You got the time to talk about what I do with my life, so much so that you're gonna talk about what I wear, what my kids say. So here's my decision as a leader. I can let you destroy me and derail my life, and I can start caring that you want to sit me down and talk about what I'm gonna do with my friends and who I hang out with and what I do. Or I could say to myself before the Lord, this is who I am, and I'm not gonna let it destroy me. Do not put that curse on me, Ricky Bobby. Because the reality is this, most of those critiques, and of course I go inside my heart and I go, are any of them true? Before me and the Lord, I'll walk in that. But the reality is this, it says more about you than it does about me. He's saying to the Corinthians, do not project your problems, your weaknesses on me as a leader. That is way too easy, because it is very true that those who you idolize, one day you will come to demonize. So don't idolize me. Don't look to me for the vicarious faith that you need. Figure it out yourself. I had young adults coming up to me when I was doing young adult ministry for 6 years. Mark, you saved my faith. You gave me everything I needed to eat. You fed me. I was like, I fed you? What? Do you know, think about that image for a second. I fed you. What? Parents feed babies. Like with a spoon, you, okay, thanks for feeding me. Feed yourself. One person liked that, and then they realized they didn't have it there. You have a Bible. The Protestant Reformation gave you a Bible. You got more translations than history's ever seen. All right, you got an army Bible, a woman's Bible, a post-pregnancy woman's Bible, a women who don't like those post-pregnancy women's Bibles. You got men's Bibles. You got men who don't like men's Bibles. You got more Bibles to go to books. You got any Bible you want. Feed yourself. Read it. Understand what your faith is. Understand who you're following. Get that in yourself, because then you won't look to a leader to define your life to such a point that you'll start to turn on them. And Paul goes, don't do that, because there's a massive weakness in your life if you do that. I don't like what you drive, Mark. It's a Mazda 3, by the way. Slaying it. All right, zoom. What's his point? His point is he wants to humble them. He wants to humble them, and he does it in 3 ways, which we're probably not gonna have any time for. Okay, he comes to them like this. He says, here's how I wanna humble you. He says this, first, for who sees anything different in you? What do you have that you did not receive? What do you have that wasn't given to you as you are not a self-made man or woman. You got breath in your lung. We talked about this last week. God decided you could live today. He gave you, every good thing you have was given to you as a gift. That's the reality. It's weird to me. It's like, why do we take credit for stuff that isn't? It's like he's saying, if you wake up and you think that you did something great with your life, that's like taking the credit for having brown eyes or being left-handed. You were given those things as a gift by God. You were a recipient of grace. It's weird to me when people walk up to me, and you know this as a parent, and they say, oh, Mark, is this your daughter? Yes. Well, she's beautiful. What do we usually say when someone says your daughter's beautiful as a parent? Thank you. Do you know how weird that is? Thank you. Like I had anything to do, I mean, I had something to do with it, but I didn't craft her cheeks in the womb. I didn't give her eyes and strain her hair out. That was God that did that. Thank you. I crafted that in the womb myself. I knitted her together. Jeff Bezos, founder of Amazon, worth $150 billion. Well, now he's worth half of that. He's getting a divorce. $66 billion divorce. Here's what he said, 2010, to graduate students in Princeton University. He got up in front of them and he called his talk, "What matters more than your talents?" And he tells them the story of his grandmother and how she was a chain smoker, and how him as a 9-year-old Jeff Bezos was very good with numbers, and he thought he was witty and smart, and so she was driving and he'd read an article that every cigarette you have takes off 30 seconds of your life, and so he did the math on her life and how long she'd been smoking. And he said he was in the back seat and he said, "Grandma, do you know statistically you've taken 9 years off your entire life because of all your smoking?" Boy, I'm witty. That's what he thought. And she turned around and looked at him and started to weep in the front seat. And his grandfather pulled the car over and he got out. He said, "Jeff, get out of the car." Now, his grandfather had never been mean to him before. He was like, "Oh my gosh, he's gonna beat me." And he gets out of the car and he says this. My grandfather looked at me and he said this, "Jeff, one day you'll understand that it's harder to be kind than clever." What I want to talk to you about today, Bezos says, is the difference between gifts and choices. Cleverness is a gift. Kindness is a choice. Gifts are easy. They're given, after all. Choices can be hard. You can seduce yourself with your gifts if you're not careful, and if you do, it'll probably be to the detriment of your choices. You know what he's saying? He's saying, you're given talents. You didn't even do that. Some of you, all you've done is said, "I'm beautiful," and then that's it. You're just running on that your goal in life is to be beautiful. But what was your contribution to that? You didn't make yourself. You've built a life on like, look at me, I'm beautiful, look at my face. It's like, you didn't construct your face. So bring something to the table. That's what he's saying. Do something other than just have talents. Be kind. That's what he's saying. It's gonna be more important, but it's harder. And so the Apostle Paul says, yeah, you've got some stuff, but the reality is you were given those things. And he says, realize, why do you boast if you did not receive it? Like you don't be entitled. Don't go through life not recognizing the things that God gave you. At every moment you should be like, oh, I appreciate this. It's when you become entitled and you start expecting it that you become a disaster. Listen, so at Christmas time, we go down to Palm Springs for 2 weeks because my family lives in Toronto and nobody wants to go to Toronto at Christmas time. And so we go, now don't worry, we don't spend a lot of money. All right, I know you're tracking. We stay in my buddy's 200 square foot casita and we eat mac and cheese every day, okay? If you care, which I know you do because you're talking about it at lunch every day, okay? So now, we go down there and we stay down. Now, this past year, we were leaving on a Wednesday because my wife had to go to something on a Thursday. So we're sitting there and the kids are in the pool and I'm sitting there and I'm like, it's like 12 noon and we gotta leave it in half an hour. And my wife's packing up the car and she's coming to get us. And I look at my kids, I'm like, I wanna stay here. I don't have to be at work until Saturday. And so here's the thing, why don't we just stay till Saturday, kids? Yeah, your mom can go. We'll hang out here in Palm Springs. It's gonna be 75 degrees tomorrow and sunny. Do you wanna see what it's like in Vancouver right now, kids? So I pulled them all to the side of the pool. I said, your mom's gonna be here in 20 minutes. I wanna stay, let's stay. And I showed the kids a picture of the weather. Look at Vancouver right now. And what do you think it was doing? Dreadful, pouring rain, dark, right? God just going, this is what you deserve, right? So it's just like, this is what it was like. So I'm like, this is terrible. I'm like, kids, gather around here. Your mom's gonna be here in 20 minutes. We have to all be unified here. Together we can say, Mom, we're gonna stay here with Dad for 3 more days of sunshine. You go ahead, we love you, go. Let's do it, kids, let's do it. And the 3 of them look at me and go, no, I wanna go home. I'm like, shut up, listen. If she hears you say that, this whole plan's over. If we leave, we gotta leave in 5 minutes. You gotta go to the pool. But if we stay, then we get 3 more days of this. We can say goodbye to Mom. She can go to the airport. We can hang out. Please, kids, please. And they're like, we wanna go home. I'm like, what? So she shows up. Hey, kids. I'm like, okay, here we go. 1, 2, 3. Unified together. This is actually what they say from the pool. Dad was trying to get us to all stay here. What the? She looked at me, she goes, did you do? I said, what? She goes, let's go out of the pool. I'm like, great, drive to the airport, we fly home. Now, here's the crazy thing. I remember growing up, never one time did my father beg me poolside to stay on vacation for 3 days longer. And I said, Father, I reject this. I should go back to the rain. Not one time did that ever happen. These are entitled girls. They don't know how good they have it in me. They don't know how blessed they are, man. And they are just gonna live their life. And one day they'll wake up and go, remember when Dad was awesome? Remember how he's so good and he tried to convince us to be in the sun, but we rejected it. We didn't know how good we had it. That's what Paul's trying to say. Something like that. You recognize what you have. You have a God who loves you so much. He gave you talents. He gave you dreams. He gave you great experiences. He gives you breath in your lungs. Don't think you are a self-made person. You have to be humble or you will lose your life. Now, the second strategy toward their humility says this: already you have all you want. Already you've become rich. Without us, you have become kings. Now, here's what took me a while. I was trying to figure out what's he talking about here. And would that you did rain. I was like, what's he doing? And here's where we get complicated. We think that he's actually teaching this. But actually what he's doing is he's being ironical. He's quoting cynics and stoics who would say these things. And he's saying, you guys are acting like you're kings. You're acting like you have everything. It's what theologians call over-realized eschatology. You're overshooting what you actually have. Because the reality is, he says what? You think you're kings, okay? But, and would that you did reign, meaning you don't actually reign. You think you're kings, but you're not actually kings. You've got a facade, you have a fantasy in your brain. You think you have everything, but I wish you actually could reign because then I'd come reign with you. But you don't reign because your life's a wreck. If you were a king, your marriage would be perfect, but it's not. If you were a king, your finances would work. Your kids wouldn't kick back against you. See, here's what he's trying to say. He's trying to say, we give this facade that everything's fine. I'm a Christian now, everything's fine. I'm victorious. I'm the man. I'm a conqueror. I can do anything. And he goes, be very careful when you start to claim to be a king, to have arrived, because look at your life. Creation's kicking back against you, isn't it? See, it's like this. Think about it this way. The people who know you the best probably are the least impressed by you, true? Think about that for a second. Why is that? I mean, so I go to conferences and I speak, okay? So I'll show up on stage and I'll walk up and I'll preach this sermon that I've crafted for hours, and people walk away, they go, brilliant. He's brilliant. He's so smart. He's so articulate. He's got his life together. Oh man, I'm telling you. And for that 45-minute well-crafted sermon that I rehearsed for 10 hours, that thing was brilliant. Yes, look at me. I am Mark Clark. Fortunately, my name rhymes. I have no idea why my parents said that to me, but a little embarrassing. But I am Mark Clark and I shall leave now. Thank you for coming. Oh yes, I'll sign your book. Oh yes, I'll shake your hand. Okay, great, awesome. Kings. Monday night, I'm sitting in my kitchen and the doorbell rings, waiting for dinner. Ding dong. I walk out. There's a guy out there. He's a badge. That's official. I shut my door. He's like, hey, I'm here to deal with your gas bill. Okay. Can you go get me a bill for what you paid last time? Sure. Didn't check his badge. Sure. Go inside, get a bill. Don't worry, honey. What are you doing out there? Don't worry. Walk out. Boom. He looks at me, he goes, okay, here's what I want you to do. I'm gonna sign you up for this program, just a few minutes, and then you're gonna pay this rate and it'll never fluctuate for the next 5 years. Okay, perfect, that's great, yeah, sign me up. So what are you up to? I don't know, what are you up to? Sign me up. Hey, I'm gonna make a phone call. Hey, what's your credit card number? Blah, 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 blah. I give him all this info. We're out there for 20 minutes, we're best buds. I just download it. Well, my social insurance number? Sure. Hey, you look official, you got a badge. So I walk back inside. Hey, honey, what was that? I don't know. Boom. Oh, I'm like, oh, don't worry about it. We just got some fixed good gas rates now. Don't worry about it. She goes, what do you mean? Who was it? I'm like, I don't know, some guy from the gas company. Well, do you have a badge number? No, it's just, she looks at it, she goes, this is a scam. I'm like, what? What are you talking about? She goes, you are so dumb. What do you mean? What do you mean? This is not a scam. Look, it's a fixed rate. She's like, a fixed rate for $2 more than we're paying right now, fool. But it's fixed. I open my door. I'm like, I'm gonna kill this guy. All right? He's scammed. I don't get scammed. All right? Now all my daughters are watching. Right? Daddy got scammed. My wife's so gracious. I went out an hour later. She goes, you got duped. All right? But I'll fix it. See, my wife needs to save me sometimes. How brilliant. It doesn't take a guy who took Greek for 3 years and wrote a master's thesis that only 3 people understand. It doesn't take a guy that smart to figure this out. My kids could have opened the door and go, scammer, right? I walk out, I'm like, hey, what's going on, Tom? Sure, I'll sign that. So my wife gets on the phone, she solved it, man. You see, the people who know me the best know I'm a disaster. That's scary because I like to perceive myself as a king. I have it all together. I have it good. And he goes, you think you've arrived? You think you're okay? You think you're kings? Are you a joke? Look at your kids. Are your kids perfect? No. Let your kids remind you you're not a king. Oh, that you would reign. Oh, that your kids would do whatever you say. This week I put my kids to bed. I went upstairs, I said, I'll do it tonight, honey. Literally Tuesday night, because I had the bad Monday, so I'm gonna make up for it on the Tuesday. I'll put the kids to bed. I bring the girls upstairs. It's time to pray. Well, they're all fighting. I was like, oh my God. And then you do this. I'm praying, which is Yahweh we're addressing. Shut up. Trinitarian God, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, we come to you in this theologically correct manner. Get off the horse. They have this little horse. And all 3 of them are sitting on this horse while I'm praying, and they're hitting each. I'm like, okay, done. Off the horse. We always sit on the horse. No, not anymore. There's no more horse. It's gone. And you, to your bedroom, I'll pray with you later. And then I hear the stairs. What are you doing? What? I'm taking charge. I'm a king. I'll put these kids in order. Come back here, all of you on the horse. Heavenly Father, we just come to you now. And I'm like, what? And she just, boom, it's done. And I go downstairs, I said, you know what they're doing? They're playing us off against each other. They want to destroy our marriage. I know it. They wake up in the morning and they're like, "Yee, how will I destroy Father today?" That is literally what my kids do. I'm convinced of it. Anyway, point being, when creation kicks against you, when your work kicks against you, when your marriage grinds against you, when your kids don't do what you say, that's gospel. Because he's saying, you're not a king. You haven't arrived. Do you know how bad you need Jesus? Do you know how bad you needed Jesus to die for you? You see, kings, they succeed. Kings accomplish stuff. Kings rule, kings reign, kings are legit. Kings can climb the mountain and get to God. And he goes, no, you needed the king to come down the mountain. You needed the king to come and die for you precisely because you're not kings and you don't reign. So have some humility in your life. That's his point. Then, third thing he says, and this is the one that made me cry. This is the one that got me all riled up because it's dangerous. He says, for I think that God has exhibited as apostles as last of all. So he starts talking about himself. You Corinthians, you've arrived. You're so great. But here's the thing about apostles like me. We're last of all, like men sentenced to death, because we become a spectacle to the world, to angels and to men. Here's what he's talking about. In the Roman Empire would go out of a war, and they would bring back all of the POWs. And all the Romans would go first in this big parade in a procession. But all the POWs would be chained up at the back. And what the Apostle Paul's doing, and then they would take them and they'd bring them into the gladiatorial arena, and they'd fight each other, and they'd get eaten by lions. And here's what the Apostle Paul says. He says, listen, you guys are kings, you Corinthian Christians. Amazing, great job, good job. You're honored, you do well, you're awesome. You figured out a way to be Christian and cool, Christian and successful, Christian and comfortable. The problem is, let me tell you about my life. You know who I am? I'm at the end of the line. I'm getting thrown to the lions. And so there's two options for you. He starts to give this list. See, we're fools for Christ's sake, but you're wise. Good for you. We're weak. But man, you're strong. Good for you. See, you're held in honor, but we in disrepute. He starts to give a list. He starts to draw a T-bar. To the present hour, we hunger, we thirst, we're poorly dressed, we're buffeted, we're homeless, and we labor working with our hands when reviled, we're persecuted, we get slandered. He's not even done yet. He's just getting warmed up. We have become and are still like the scum of the world, the refuse of all things. That's a bad word, by the way. I'd not write these things to you to make you ashamed. I want to inspire you. I want to inspire you. How do you want to inspire us? I want to give you a list of what an actual Christian looks like. You see, what an actual Christian looks like is the list I just gave you. The problem is you have figured out a way to be a Christian and yet the opposite of those things. You're not the refuse of all things. You're not the scum of the world. You're actually honored. You're not homeless. You have a nice home. You're not hunger and thirst. You're not poorly dressed. You're well dressed. Here's what landed with me. You know what he's saying? He's saying, Corinthians, do you know how you have figured out the balance of being Christian and honored? Do you know how you figured out how to be Christian and not homeless and not persecuted and not buffeted and not in the arena getting killed by lions? Do you know how you've done that? Because you might not be Christians. That's how. You see, there are only two types of people. And this is what I mean. Verse 16, here's what he says. For though you have countless guides in Christ, you do not have many fathers, for I became your father in Christ. And then he says this, I urge you, be imitators of me. What do you mean? Here's what I want you to do. Here's your problem. There's only two types of people in the world. There's people who are sitting up with Caesar in the crowd, watching people get ripped apart by lions. And then there's the people in the arena. And you are up with Caesar, and I'm getting mauled to death. And my request, my call is that you come down into the arena. You be imitators of me. You wanna know what Christianity looks like? Look at the list before. Not the second list, the first list. Buffeted, reviled, persecuted, homeless, with nothing, no reputation, scum of the earth, refuse. The only way you figured out how to try to balance both is because you might not actually be a Christian. You might not actually know him. You might not be actually listening to what he's asking of your life at all. See, here's what you want this sermon to be about. You want this sermon to be about your beliefs, because that's why we come to church. Just tell me what to believe theologically. Don't talk about like what I gotta do. Just talk about what I believe. And he doesn't talk anything about your theology. He doesn't say anything about, now here's the solution to your problem. Let's talk about your Trinitarian ideas. Let's talk about the deity of Christ. He's saying this, I already know that you believe the right stuff. That's too easy. Here's what I'm actually after. Your praxis, your life, what you do with your time and your money and your family and your house and your clothing and your cars, what you do, that's what I'm after. Be imitators of me, he says. And he doesn't name one theological thing. He says, this is what my life looks like on the outside. I'm persecuted, I'm buffeted, I'm a loser. I'm not honored. See, here's the problem. You're either kings or you're getting persecuted and sentenced to death in his list. But you can't be both. Close your eyes across all the sites. Feel the weight of that for a second. Feel the weight of the burden of the fact that your life may not reflect the list Paul just laid out for an apostle/Christian. But before you start to jump right into, well, that was just the first century, just feel it for a second and ask the Lord what he's asking you to change about yourself, because some of you need to come down from being in the crowd and actually enter the arena. You do not suffer enough. You don't. You don't feel it enough. You don't sacrifice enough. You do not. You are very comfortable and you come to church to be told what to believe, but not how to live. That is a very dangerous place to be in the presence of this text. Because the last thing I would want for your life is for you to come to the throne room of God and he said, you got 1 Corinthians 4, right? And then you stood up and you meandered in the foyer and laughed and joked and great and went on and got into your car and drove to Cactus Club and had lunch and forgot to the diminishing of your soul. I read an article this week and the first sentence in it was this: the gospel teaches us how to live a certain way. I want us to grab that. It's not just about what we believe. It's about how to live in a certain way, and some of you need to adjust. I don't want to make this easy on you too quickly. I want you to feel that weight. The gospel teaches us a way to live, not just what to believe. It teaches us a way to live. It teaches us a way to live. And some of us need to adjust some stuff today, right now, Monday morning. This needs to change. You go back and you read the list and you go, how does my life reflect that? Am I in the crowd or am I in the arena? Am I sitting beside Caesar or am I down with the Apostle Paul getting lit up for the sake of the gospel? Which one is me? The gospel teaches us how to live. Now, before I pray for you, listen to the second half of the sentence of the article I read. Before you get too weighted down, the second half of the sentence says this: yes, the gospel teaches us how to live a certain way. And then the article said this: but it also rescues us when we fail to live the way we're supposed to. The gospel also rescues you when you fail to live the way you're supposed to, the way the Apostle Paul just laid out. Jesus said, if you follow me, in this world you will have tribulation. But when you've couched your life so much so that you feel no persecution, no sacrifice, no pain, I came to the cross, died for you, rose again to rescue you from your own failure so that you might start doing that tomorrow. Father, I don't say these things to burden us. I'm preaching to myself. The beauty of the gospel of a God who came The king who gave it all up and died in my place is the beauty of a story that tells me how to live, but also rescues me when I fail, and I do fail every week. Let us be a people and a church marked by the list Paul laid out and then said, be imitators of this. You want to know what it means to follow Jesus in the modern world? Be imitators of the list I just laid out. And where it's not true about us in heart or praxis in real life, highlight it, teach us, show us, and let us have the courage to actually live in it. Break our heart, but let us then stand up and go, okay, Jesus rose again. He will give us the power to succeed in this. In Jesus' good name we pray. Amen.